Is Europe in deep trouble? Let's talk about something that's been brewing for a while but isn't making headlines as much as it should: Europe. And spoiler alert, things aren't looking good for our friends across the pond. We're talking about an economy that's struggling to keep up, and the numbers are pretty damning. But it wasn't always the case. Post-World War II, Europe was on fire, not literally this time, thankfully, with its labor productivity climbing from 22% of the US level in 1945 to a staggering 95% by 1995. Impressive, right? But fast forward to today, and the European economy feels like it's hit a wall. Take Germany, the poster child of European efficiency and innovation. Official figures showed gross domestic product fell by 0.2% last year after dropping by 0.3% in 2023. That is 2 consecutive years of GDP degrowth. Source: Trading Economics. Late last year, one of the country's biggest employers, Volkswagen, agreed with unions to cut more than 35,000 jobs by 2030 after a slump in demand, although the carmaker scrapped plans to close plants for the first time. Meanwhile, the broader euro area has been stuck with stagnant GDP growth, and real wages have barely moved for over a decade. Compare that to the US, where wage growth is nearly 4 times higher. Europe's productivity, incomes, and consumption have been in the slow lane since the 2000s, and the gap with the US is widening. In short, Europe is struggling to grow, and the numbers paint a grim picture. So, how did it get so bad? Let's dig into the reasons, and luckily, we have Mario Draghi, former ECB president, to guide us. He recently spoke about this, and his insights are eye-opening. Why is Europe in a mess? 2 big reasons. Draghi points to 2 big turning points: technology and falling consumption. And while both are serious, the second one, falling consumption, is the real heart of the problem. Let's take them one by one. 1. The tech shock. In the late 1990s, something massive happened: the Internet revolution. The US tech sector exploded, creating companies like Google, Amazon, and Facebook that reshaped the global economy. But Europe, it missed the train. While American companies leaned into innovation, Europe's industrial-heavy economies, like Germany and France, stuck to what they knew: cars, machinery, and old-school manufacturing. And this matters because tech doesn't just build shiny apps, it boosts productivity. The US saw its productivity skyrocket, while Europe stalled. Draghi highlights that this tech gap has been a major driver of the growing economic divergence between the 2 regions. 2. Falling consumption. Now, this is where things get really interesting, and depressing. European households started saving more and spending less. Back in the day, this wasn't a huge problem because the government and companies made up for it. Here's how. Households saved a surplus instead of spending their hard-earned money. Europeans preferred to stash it away. Maybe they were cautious, or maybe it's cultural. Either way, their savings didn't translate into demand for goods and services. Governments and companies compensated deficits to keep the economy running. Governments borrowed and spent more, and companies took on debt to invest and expand. This delicate balancing act worked for a while. But then 2008 hit and everything changed. The 2008 turning point. When the global financial crisis rocked the world, both the EU and the US faced a choice: how do we recover? The US did not hesitate to spend on stimulus. The government poured money into the economy, and the Federal Reserve kept interest rates low to encourage borrowing and spending. The result: American consumers kept spending, businesses recovered, and the economy bounced back. Europe, on the other hand, took the opposite route: austerity. Governments cut spending to control debt. Companies tightened their belts. Households, already cautious, saved even more. The result: Europe's recovery was slow, uneven, and painful. Household consumption never picked up the way it did in the US. And because people weren't spending, businesses had little incentive to invest. It's been a vicious cycle ever since. The export reliance trap. So, if people in Europe weren't spending, where did growth come from? Exports. Europe leaned heavily on selling goods to the rest of the world. Germany, in particular, became the world's factory for high-quality cars and machinery. But this strategy had its limits, and now, even exports are in trouble. Why exports are failing. Draghi points out that Europe's export engine is sputtering, and much of this has to do with Germany. Let's talk about why. China's evolution. Germany's car industry relied heavily on exports to China. But over the past decade, China's domestic car industry has exploded. Today, China produces electric vehicles that are cheaper and often better than what Germany offers. So, not only is China buying fewer German cars, but it's also competing with Germany in global markets. Source: Merix.org. Deglobalization. The world is moving toward deglobalization. Countries like the US are focusing on domestic production and reducing reliance on foreign imports. For Europe, which depends on exports, this is a nightmare scenario. And here's the kicker: Germany's struggles aren't just its own. Germany's economy is so central to Europe that when it falters, the entire region feels the impact. If Germany's industrial base weakens, it's like taking the engine out of a car. What does this mean for Europe? So, let's recap. Europe's household consumption is weak. Governments and companies stopped spending after 2008 because of austerity. The export engine, which Europe relied on, is now sputtering thanks to China and deglobalization. Draghi's conclusion: Europe is in a tough spot. It's trapped in a cycle of low consumption, weak investment, and now, falling exports. And fixing this isn't easy. Why this matters? Why should you care about Europe's economic troubles? Well, for one, Europe's economy is massive. When it struggles, it impacts global trade, investment flows, and even geopolitical stability. Plus, Europe's challenges offer lessons for other regions, including the US and Asia. Here's the big takeaway: an economy cannot thrive without strong domestic demand. Relying too much on exports or government spending is risky because those crutches can disappear. At the end of the day, a healthy economy needs people who are willing and able to spend. So, what's next for Europe? Draghi believes the region needs serious structural reforms. That means removing barriers within the EU, improving productivity, and finding ways to boost household consumption. But these changes take time, and Europe doesn't have the luxury of waiting. Final thoughts. Europe's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when economies fail to adapt. The region missed the tech revolution, leaned too heavily on exports, and chose austerity when it needed stimulus. Now, it's paying the price. But hey, let's not count Europe out just yet. The region has faced tough challenges before and come out stronger. Whether it can do so again depends on its willingness to change. Let us know what you think. Can Europe turn things around, or is it stuck in this downward spiral? Until next time, take care.